Well, welcome back to another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I'm your host, Chris Egger, and tonight I am joined by two very special guests. I'm really looking forward to getting into the night and our interview discussion this evening with Mr. Jason Beck. Hey, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Jason is the founder of High at 9 News, as well as some dispensaries in his history. He's going to get into a little bit of his background with us, as well as being the highest Republican and just one cool stoner. So, thanks for joining us, man. Welcome.
Yes.
And seated to his left is someone that I can say with heartfelt gratitude, thank you. We have a congressman by the name of Dana Rohrabacher, who has joined us this evening. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Dana and his 30 years serving the United States as a congressman from the great state of California, he was the mastermind and the author of a very important bill in the cannabis industry's evolution, which was the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which provided protections from federal prosecution to legal licensed cannabis markets throughout the United States. So that's where the heartfelt thank you comes from, sir. And we appreciate you being with us tonight. So I'm going to start off with you, Jason, and we're going to get into your background. Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience here in the cannabis culture, the industry, going back into the 2000s, but moving forward to where you're at today and what you're working on?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jason Beck. I'm the longest continuous retail operator of cannabis in the United States. I've owned and operated dispensaries since 2001. I started in San Francisco when Terrence Hallinan was our district attorney in San Francisco. And at that time, we probably only had maybe like 10 or 11 stores in the entire state of California at that time. And it's been one hell of a ride. I was on Terrence Hallinan's medical cannabis task force in San Francisco. And in that group, we created three pieces of policy that really stuck and really transgressed into other municipalities. One of those is we made San Francisco a sanctuary city for medical cannabis. The second one was we made it the lowest priority for law enforcement to enforce on. And the third was we partnered with the Department of Public Health to create the Medical Cannabis Patient Identification Card Program, which is the first ever government-issued cannabis card that was actually issued by the health department and is a registered government ID. That's a photo ID that actually does not list your name, only lists a 16-digit number along with an expiration date. And when we worked on SB 420 on the state level, we incorporated that into every single health department in the entire state. And that's why you now have state cannabis ID card program.
Bravo, my man, bravo. And so tell us a little bit about High at 9, because we're going to get into that, but you've really, kind of extended yourself now as kind of a thought leadership voice in the cannabis culture, right?
100%. And I've always been a thought leader voice, but I've mainly been working behind the scenes, working with people like Congressman Rohrabacher and others throughout the years on crafting policy that really not only incubated the cannabis space, but also allowed us to move more agilely through the constant struggles that we have throughout
the education
cannabis.
Behind
Yes.
The office education for many of the leaders who are voting on these issues, right?
Exactly. And so I felt like one of the next kind of like progressions is to amplify the type of messages that people need to hear and have the kind of conversations that people need to have, so that way they truly understand all of these different issues, all of the different factions that are working against us, as well as all the other factions that are working to help us at the same time as well. And so came up with High at 9 News. It's now America's #1 daily cannabis news show. We're on 9 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific and high noon on the East Coast. And we encourage you to come check it out.
Very cool, man. Very cool. I definitely will. Maybe you can have me on sometime and we can cross-pollinate.
Most definitely. Definitely.
Very cool.
Yes.
Very cool. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Now, Congressman, if you don't mind, and I'm going to call you Congressman while you're up here, because we do, have to respect the fact that service, really what it represents. Can you give us a brief insight into a man who's served Congress for 30 years, served presidents on staff, and just a little bit of your background, and then maybe some of your passion for cannabis, if there is any.
It's all about freedom.
That's right.
That's it. It's all about freedom. When I grew up in a household, my father was a Marine colonel and everything like this. And over the years, I was involved with various things to help promote the freedom and security of the United States of America. But without freedom being the priority, there's nothing you can do that's worthwhile. Because if you're going to, yes, some foreign threat is going to do, they can take away our freedom. Not if we give it away to our own government beforehand. So I've just basically come to the point that I believe, and I always did believe, that I would support those people, whether it's on the left or the right or whoever it is, who want to run their own lives and do not believe in trying to control other people's lives through the government. And it's just that basic principle led me to becoming someone who, for example, I don't want to brag too much here, but
Go right ahead. Take the victory laps, all that you want, all day.
well, when we have the cannabis industry, what difference does it make if someone is smoking cannabis if compared to some of the other thing that he consumes, if he is free to choose so? And and I will tell you that unfortunately, I was Ronald Reagan's speechwriter for 7 years in the Reagan White House, and but not just on the issue of cannabis. He was a pro-freedom guy, and we were moving him. But at that time, communism was a major threat to our country. And let me just say that I'm very proud that during the Reagan years, we cut deals with the Soviet Union at the time. And I remember I was the one who smuggled the speech to him that said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall. I didn't write it, but I smuggled it to him. But it was important for us to make sure that Ronald Reagan was seen as a pro-champion of freedom and not just anti-communist. And although I think being an anti-communist is a good thing, because I am an anti-communist, but if you're an anti-communist and you're snuffing out people's freedom in your own country to live their own lives, whose side are you really on? No, I think the free people of the world, and I've been trying to, especially free people of our country, need to work together to make sure that we do not, in the name of our superiority in intelligence, everybody who's making rules has the superiority in intelligence. That's why they think they can tell us what to do.
And what was the thinking for you with this mindset of freedom being the preeminent kind of driving force of your legislative mindset with the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which was such a critical piece of a watershed breakthrough moment for cannabis operators to be protected and have their freedom protected?
Well, basically, the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, how did it affect you?
Well, oh man, I mean, during the time, and this is kind of because I helped out a lot with this through this space, but during the time, I had recently experienced, I forget which number of my raids, because I've been raided 3 times by the DEA, but there I was fighting an asset forfeiture case with the Office of the Attorney General, and my landlord was in danger of losing his property. We were doing a fancy little dance of faking an eviction to appease the Justice Department,
right.
and then we miraculously were able to pass this legislation, this Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which actually stopped the persecution from the Office of the Attorney General, because they were no longer allowed to extrapolate federal funds to prosecute crimes on medical cannabis. And Dane and I were having a conversation about this, and he was saying, I wish I could have taken it a little further so that it would have covered adult use as well. And I was telling him that as far as my legal opinion on this is the fact that it actually does cover that, because appropriations bills have to be written in such broad scope that the DEA, DOJ is not even allowed to extrapolate federal funds to even investigate if cannabis is either medical or adult use, and so therefore it is all deemed as medical under
Right.
that act.
And what my amendment did legally said that the federal government, and it's still in power today.
Still now, yep.
Yeah, that the federal government cannot spend money, any of it money, in order to supersede a state law that legalizes the medical use of cannabis for medical purposes. So that still is in place, and as you can hear, it has an impact.
I'm still here.
And it set the
been a hell of a
precedent. So
ride.
thank you. That's a great lead into an episode of Pop Politics, ladies and gentlemen. And I was really nervous tonight. But, so one of the things that Jason and I talked about for tonight, and Congressman Rohrabacher is going to join us in participating in, is we're going to look at some High at 9 news, right? So Jason is producing news on a daily. There's articles being posted up. And I think, Brian, if we can put up the first of the articles here tonight, we're going to get into some of the current news that's going on today. And
Here we go.
yeah, right. Here we go. All right, so this first story caught my eye for a couple reasons, because there was another story today that piggybacks on it, but the lack of cannabis enforcement, we've seen this in California, right? The traditional, the illicit market, the illegal market continues to flourish.
The freedom market.
The freedom market, amen. And at the same time, people are trying to get into these regulated mindsets and locations and stuff. So, Jason, give me some insight into what it was that this coalition, now this is the MSO, the multi-state operators who are functioning in the medical market currently, looking at the rollout of adult use and the future of cannabis in New York.
Yeah, so this is basically the medical licensees in New York partnered up and created this body, so then that way they could speak as one voice to let the state know that they believe that what the state is doing in New York is unconstitutional, so to say. The fact that they are being excluded out of the adult use market when they already have proper infrastructure to be able to facilitate legal transactions, and the fact that the state of New York is not allowing them to participate in that space when they allowed them to participate in the medical market. So it's a very, very interesting argument that is going to get heard out in New York, and I'm actually with them. I think they should be allowed to participate in this market. I mean, you're in New York, you only have 4 stores currently open in operation, and you brand it as this plethora of openness for cannabis, and you only have 4 stores open in the entire New York, and you have a trap shop on every single bodega in New York. So it's like, and they estimate approximately 1,200 or 1,500 illegal shops that they can calculate. But I go back and I say this: I bet you that numbers is a lot higher than that, because how many illicit delivery services are operating throughout New York that aren't even using a storefront? And that's always been how New York has operated for decades upon decades.
So, Dana, you would have been happy with the decriminalization across the board of cannabis, right, as a freedom and liberty. But what do you think about people who are trying to do the business right, who are being excluded? I mean, that's also a different type of, context to this regulatory market that they're creating.
Well, we need to make sure that people, again, have a right to choose what they're doing. But most importantly, if we're talking about health-related issues, we're not talking. I happen to believe if someone wants to get. I don't smoke marijuana anymore, I should say. But I think, look, I'm an old man. I have aches and pains I didn't have before. Cannabis has a huge amount of support and treatment for people like myself who've got aches and pains because they're getting older. For the government to step in and do anything at that point is a sin against the elderly. And it is. And Anyway, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, well, you know what? You're here to speak your mind, sir, and you're definitely in the spirit of it. And I will say this. So, Jason, we were talking about this. One of the other things that's going on in New York right now is that there's a lot of California product that's seemingly the burner distro issue here in California. So the interstate commerce going back to
a lot of Oklahoma product out there too,
right? Oklahoma, maybe even Oregon, Washington,
California
Colorado.
branded bags.
And so my point, to this is interstate commerce, right? At some point, we would hope it's everything siloed state by state, but for the federal landscape. So these articles are important. What's going on in New York? I mean, they can learn a lot from what we went through here in California. I think they've exponentially compressed the timeline from beginning to where they are now, right? In terms of the policy making, opening more stores. What did you think about the recent court cases, too? The challenges have finally been dropped to the social equity licenses from the Mr. Gay from Michigan, I can't remember his first name, who had filed lawsuits that froze New York and multiple areas and jurisdictions. And then here in California and Los Angeles was just recently dismissed,
Just recently,
right?
yeah, they just Los Angeles, I think, is getting ready to issue another 150 licenses under that because of that lawsuit holdup. And New York is just gonna. This is just more of the same of what we've already experienced here. Just watching it retranslate and reshape, reform with different players and different names on the suits, but it's all the same thing that's happening. You know, it's people that are being hampered from the ability to operate.
Well, and so with that, you guys, we're going to move on to the second article that I thought was really important that I read this week on High at 9 News, and that is Smokeland is testing a loophole to sell cannabis by credit card, but take it one step further if you get beyond the headline, by using cryptocurrency. What's up, Jason?
I mean, I said it today on the show, and just so everyone knows, we have a wide, diverse panel discussion on all of these topics during the day, so that way you get a wide perspective, not just my own, but people that think totally differently than me as well. So encourage you to check it out. But to me, this is clear and blatant money laundering. I personally would never do this in my wildest dreams while cannabis is a Schedule I drug. But what Smokeland is doing is they are working with a crypto company where you are actually purchasing cryptocurrency with your credit card and then exchanging the cryptocurrency for cannabis. And I'm not sure how the DCC is going to feel about this. And I'm really interested to see what their CPA and the IRS have to say about this.
Right.
Well, but the point is, why should the federal government or anybody else be interested in those transactions? Who cares? Yes. It's their own life. We're not talking about somebody who's pulling a gun on somebody and stealing them or forcing somebody to consume something they don't want to consume. The federal government should just butt out of people's lives, and if they let them make their own decisions, it'll work out. And anyway, I don't think the government should get in and decide what type of commerce.
Oh, I'm not saying that I think the government should get in. I'm saying it's ultimately inevitable that they will.
And there's a lot of cannabis attorneys who are probably thanking Jason for reminding people that anything daring in the financial world is probably as fast as, we used to have an expression, Dana, in cannabis in California, that the fastest way to a federal criminal indictment in cannabis was running for city council, right?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
But the second most fastest way is funky accounting, right?
I mean, we've seen it happen, and some other stories we've seen is we've covered all of the financial distress that the cannabis industry is in due to the overtaxation, and how a lot of cannabis companies that owe the IRS substantial lump sums of money is actually cheaper to make payment plans and not pay the IRS than it is to actually raise capital right now at the current market rates.
Wild. So the next story kind of folds into this. We have the Vermont cannabis grower pays heavy fine after posting Instagram video of New York delivery. So a cultivator who is growing legally in Vermont drove his product with an anticipation that he would be entering the New York market as the licensing rolls out. And he posted on Instagram that he had brought some product and was hit with a $20,000 fine. But interstate commerce, once again, isn't that where the federal government, the relaxing, the final layer of this needs to happen so that there can be interstate commerce?
I mean, I'm all for interstate commerce, but there's a lot that has to get worked out before you actually can have interstate commerce. One of those things being testing, because you can't have a vape cart that tests clean in Oregon coming to California and then doesn't pass the same type of standardization process. So we have to create some type of federal standardization for testing if we expect to have interstate commerce. But this article is hilarious because this guy right here in Vermont has a license in Vermont to cultivate and sell cannabis in Vermont, and thought it would be a good idea to document an illegal sale of legal product in another state. Now, this is clearly breaking federal law right here when you're transporting a controlled substance across the state line, and you're doing it through your legal business. To me, is just not. This is like kind of like an episode of America's Dumbest Criminals. But he got lucky in the sense that the state only fined him $20,000 and is like basically just saying, "Don't do it again" for 2 years. And so it baffles me. I'm surprised this guy didn't lose his license.
Right, but with all the other product from brands that was bought in illegal markets and brought, right? Mm-hmm. At least he showed up and put his face to it, right? Yeah. The rest of that is some unknown.
This was all off of his license, off of his metric and everything. And so
hey, maybe we should look at him as an activist.
I mean, or a whacktivist.
Right? I'm sure from that perspective, we have a fourth one coming up. And now, since you are known as the highest Republican, all right, I'm going to get into with this. So cannabis industry gears up for potential gold rush. But this article is focused on the state of Florida. And one of the leaders, one of the most vocal, kind of visible leaders in the Republican Party right now is Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida, who really hasn't seemed to be that friendly to cannabis. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's happening in Florida, where you see DeSantis as a position, and maybe even a little bit of what you think he might say in a national discussion on the topic of cannabis?
Well, I think Dana could talk about the national discussion a little bit better than myself in regards with Governor DeSantis. But what's happening right now in Florida is very interesting because you have Kim Rivers, who is the CEO of TrueLeave, who is funding an adult use initiative. And it would basically allow the current operators to control the adult use market as well. And I know that there's a lot of activist contention for this, not to mention in Florida, you have to get 60% of the vote because it would be a constitutional amendment. So there's a higher threshold of what it has to pass as far as voter turnout. And it is one big shit show in Florida because they're also trying to Kim Rivers is also trying to pass a bill that would treat all CBD hemp edibles and products as traditional food type products, which would basically destroy the entire infrastructure and sales mechanisms that are currently going on in all these hemp CBD shops in Florida because they want to make sure that they're capturing all the market share in their own stores.
Wow, right? And Dana, if you don't mind, he did offer you up to give some perspective on what a Governor DeSantis might say in a national context.
I'm a DeSantis person. I couldn't handle the other candidate, and for obvious reasons. I like DeSantis. I think he's a person who wants decentralized government, and I've never talked to him about the cannabis issue. But I will be talking to him about the cannabis. But he knows. Excellent. He served in Congress with me. I forgot.
Yeah, they were members of Congress together.
How did he?
Yeah.
I forgot how he voted on the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment.
We can go back and take a look at it. But, bring the voice there because I think to your point, right, a lot of the California brands have entrenched themselves in the market there. A lot of the MSOs originated there, right? Some of them.
Well, hold on. I think there's a big part of this that everyone is really forgetting is the fact that Florida is one of the best states to live in because of a lack of income tax, and therefore you have a lot more of your money to spend, and therefore there's a much larger customer base for California product in Florida.
And let me note, I'm sorry to sound too partisan here because I am a Republican. The bottom line is that if you get the government, people who believe in government is going to watch out for you. Government is going to control what you consume because they want to protect you. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. can't balance that off. What good is it doing versus how much freedom you're losing by allowing the government to make decisions for you? And that's even worse when it comes to whether it should be the federal or state government. And those of us who, if you do believe that the government should be making decisions, your personal decisions for you, at least it should be your local government and not your federal government. And I think at very least DeSantis is very good on that. And he's created a very efficient and effective government in South Florida and throughout Florida.
So, this is a pop politics show, and to the degree that we're talking about it is his position on cannabis policy, and we'll have to see. My understanding is he's raised some rates for certain licensing elements, right?
I have no problem with that. He's raised the rates to $1 million for the operators to renew their license. I mean, in a state where you have these super licenses that have sold for as much as $50 million for just a piece of paper. I don't think $1 million that the state is asking for allowing you to be able to open up unlimited stores and be totally vertically integrated is a lot to ask for.
And so he hasn't publicly opposed the idea of this ballot initiative going to the voters, right? So maybe
I think more than what people need to also to understand, Governor DeSantis is the person that brought smokable flower and allowed for smokable flower to be sold in the state of Florida at these dispensaries. So I think that speaks a lot more to his overall position.
Pragmatism about it. Okay, cool. Right. Well, moving on, we have another article here, and I think, if I remember correctly, this is one that can kind of take us into the rest of it. So we looked at 5 articles Monday through Friday. This is the kind of information you can expect to glean from High at 9 News. I know I check it out and have some friends who are part of the correspondent teams there. But the Justice Department could help marijuana industry via Cole Memo 2.0, or it could hurt reform. And this is a big step. So, Jason, I mean, you were pretty strong on this one with me earlier. So I'm going to let you take the helm on this.
This is just more bureaucratic waste by our federal government, because the reality that anyone believes that the Cole Memo did anything is just a farce. And the fact that they're trying to do a new 2.0 version is just more government time wasted on not solving the solution.
And doesn't basically the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment make the Cole Memo kind of superfluous?
A lot of people, because of the sensationalism around Obama, they thought that the Cole Memo, a lot of activists believe that the Cole Memo does what actually the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment does. The Cole Memo is just a directive that just says, hey, don't do this, don't do that, but has no teeth, has no type of enforcement, and is just a directive. There is nothing that stops any federal agent from not listening to that or obeying that directive in any way whatsoever. And that's why it's so important that we've had the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment in place, because that's a budget rider that stipulates what exactly they can spend financials on in order to investigate. And that is the single piece of legislation that has allowed the industry to grow to what we all see it today nationwide across the country.
Right, because the Cole Memo was essentially saying to these various attorney districts, that was you just don't do it, right? That we're not going to prosecute as long as these,
if I remember correctly, Dana, there was 8 guidelines that they had in there. That there's as long as they don't break any of these 8 rules, then just leave them alone, kind of thing.
Exactly, right.
And technically, that guy from Vermont, he technically broke one of those 8 rules.
And technically, by the way, I think the Cole Memo is no longer. The presidents have changed.
Rescinded.
Right? It was rescinded.
Yeah.
And it's never been replaced. But
it never did anything in the first place. So who cares if it got rescinded?
Right. And the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment, the fact that we're not talking about legalization and safe banking, right? So that from this perspective is where we're going to start dipping off into questions. And guys, I really like.
Let me just note this.
Oh yes, sir.
That we're not talking about the use of marijuana for the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment, although I happen to believe if someone wants to use marijuana, if they're an adult, they have a right to buy it and sell it or whatever they want to do, and to consume it if that's it. I personally am not advocating that, but they should be free to do that. And so any type of regulation that comes should come not from the federal government, but from state and local government. But the federal government can't mandate. I don't even believe that they should mandate that on the state and local governments. And you don't want to start giving the federal government all sorts of power over local government when indeed they may change their opinion. Now the Democratic Party may now be in favor of legalizing some medical marijuana.
There's a lot of Democrats that are. There's a lot of Democrats that are not.
And that may change because then anybody who receives any federal Medicare money has got to do this or that, and all of a sudden they control everything.
Well, to your point about local control, though, that's also been one of the greatest obstacles to an efficient legalized marketplace here in California, because the League of California Cities lobbied pretty hard in that proponent group that put Prop 64 on the ballot, right, for that local approval control. And still to this day, is it still at 60% plus of the municipalities and counties in the state of California that don't have some sort of time, place, and manner zoning and entitlement code that allows for cannabis uses?
I would call it regulatory framework in place. But I think another but I think another thing to always keep in mind too is that they were trying to make it too that would also ban delivery in those municipalities as well. But that was rejected, and delivery you can have cannabis delivered to any residents in any city, whether or not you have an ordinance in place or not within those jurisdictions. So I think it's a small victory, but I know that there's a lot of people, some people in this room that were up in Sacramento working on some of these issues just last week, and so we wish them all the best. And I heard that there was some progress made, but we'll see.
I think that we should, when we're discussing cannabis, it's really important to understand we're not, some people, older people in particular, I'm old now, however, I shouldn't be saying that, but they think that what we're talking about is just recreational use of marijuana. Okay, medical use of marijuana is much more important and significant today as far as I'm concerned, but I certainly agree that anybody who wants to smoke marijuana instead of drink alcohol, let them do it. But what we're really talking, what concerns me is we are finding every day there are things that we're learning from the cannabis plant.
There's no doubt that the medicinal, in 1996, there were, gay people were dying of AIDS, and the oncologists who were treating AIDS victims were the major force behind the passage in 1996. And it was anecdotal. The munchies helped nourish the body to sustain the chemotherapy, and people started surviving. And so they said, it's anecdotal. It opened up a huge door, and it's been a long journey. But maybe I should share from you my perspective on the freedom that you're talking about, right? So as a business person, someone who has great, historical ties to Humboldt County, to Sonoma County, and some of the Northern California cultivating, growing areas, has been to over 100 Grateful Dead shows in my lifetime. I may not look like a Grateful Dead head, but I have been to many shows when Jerry was still alive, right? So there was a time when cannabis could result in incarceration for a decade plus. It could put you into a federal system for life, right? For many of those penalties. So when and then of course in Humboldt County, you had families, you had people whose whole economic reality was built around an agribusiness product that California is uniquely qualified to craft and put out there. So it was the protection that was afforded to those individuals, from asset forfeiture, from freedom forfeiture to a prison system for a nonviolent crime. And then finally, and most importantly, the ability, to your point, is to have the licensing and the standardization of expectations of quality. But it was the protection from incarceration, right? That was really the most important fact to me. So I treat it like a business mindset, and I get where you're coming from, Dana. It is a medicinal. Dr. Thomas Minahan and his daughter Mallory. You have Charlotte Figge in the story with Sanjay Gupta that really proved out the true medicinal benefit. And I've seen story after story, right? So you're right. We can never lose touch with that moral high ground, for sure.
And if the more control and regulations that were done to protect us, we're finding it's even worse than it's destroying our freedom. It is destroying the health of people who didn't need to live in pain and agony. And I'm 75 now, so I'm experiencing some of that. As I say, I got metal shoulders, okay? But if at night.
I'd hate to be behind you in line at the TSA check when we're going through airport security.
I got this.
I think we might have to have a rematch of the arm wrestling match with Putin.
with Putin, right? I arm wrestled Putin.
Did you actually arm wrestle him?
Yeah, I
Did you beat him?
No.
He used a Sambo throw on you, huh?
But I will tell you, right afterwards, we were at this bar in Washington, and so this guy, anyway, he took me down, and this guy came up to me and said, "Well, Dana, I'll take him on." Well, this guy, I know about this guy, Jack Wheeler.
Yeah.
Jack Wheeler was with me in Afghanistan fighting Soviet troops, I might add, and he's a really strong guy. And so he said, "Dana, let me take him on." I said, "Okay." So he gets in there, and Putin's there at this bar, and Putin starts breaking him down, and Jack starts going, "Well, do you want me to start? When do you want me to start, Dana?" I said, "Well, get it now." And they go, "Bam!" And Putin's arm goes down, and he goes down, and Putin jumps up and screams, "CIA, CIA!" and my friend goes, "KGB, KGB." Anyway, that was, I don't know how I got into that story.
Right. Well, that's why we have you here, sir. And by the way, retirement's treating you well. That was a good story.
But the point is I'm getting to be an old man now, not going into Afghanistan or war zones anymore, but I'm suffering from pains that every older person gets. And I'll put CBD salve on my arm. And if there's any seniors who have pain in their arms or their legs or whatever, and haven't tried that, they're fools. But it's worse, they're being sinned against by people who claim to be watching out for them, by preventing them from taking this themselves. And so I think that we have to, there's the ramifications.
You were absolutely instrumental, in my understanding as well, is liberating veterans affairs doctors from not being able to recommend or for veterans to be able to consume cannabis in states where it's legal. Am I right?
Look, either we're going to permit people to run their lives, and especially our specialists, like our doctors, and whether it's in the Veterans Hospital or anywhere else, they should be able to say what they think is best for their patients. I don't care what it is. The fact is that that's the problem with communism. Under communism and socialized medicine,
Or totalitarianism, as communism exists in the world today.
That you have people who have the power to make these decisions for you. And you may think that it's going to be good, but in the end, what do? They waste our time on taking away some salve that you can put on your arm to alleviate your pain. How ridiculous is that?
How ridiculous is that, Jason?
It's totally ridiculous, and I think we should also give Congressman Rohrabacher another round of applause because of the fact he was the first ever member of Congress to come out and admit to using cannabis as a topical while being a sitting member of Congress.
Yeah, that's what I hope. But I have to admit, what show was I on? This guy was on my ass. I was on my ass, and I was criticizing Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and I said, "Oh yeah, he didn't inhale. Sure, he didn't inhale." And this guy comes across and says, "What about you? Did you inhale?" And I said, "Well, I did everything but drink the bong water."
And by the way,
and the media never harassed him again on that question after that.
If I'm not mistaken, if we're going to tell Dana Rohrabacher stories and legendary stories, right? You were at one point working as an editorial writer at the Orange County Register, and you had a cannabis plant on the desk in your office.
Well, let me note that the Orange County Register was the third largest newspaper in the state and had a totally pure, freedom-oriented policies for cannabis. So that's why that was there. Sure, why not? I mean, we're.
What year was that? It was like this. Was it 70s, 80s? When was that?
It was well. Let's see. It must have been late 79.
So right around the time that Cheech and Chong were putting it on the screens, you were putting it on
my desk,
the zeitgeist of the community as to why this plant wasn't legalized.
Well, that's because there's nothing complicated in this issue for me. Even if I thought that drinking beer or alcohol was bad for people, I'm not going to outlaw that for adults. Neither am I going to outlaw them taking a weed of some kind, whatever kind it is, and consuming that. I'm not going to take away somebody's freedom to make those choices because I know better. And that's what this is. People are fooling themselves thinking they know what's better for other people.
Right. So let's get into this because while we have you here, and Jason, you and I have been talking a lot about safe banking, right? Mm-hmm. And Congress is where the sausage is made, and no one ever wants to see where all that, weird lips and assholes ends up in the food you're eating, right? But
no one would eat hot dogs if they knew how they were made.
For real, right? And that's kind of Congress in a nutshell, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea that safe banking may precede federal legalization and descheduling, and it may also precede some sort of nationalized harmony on this issue. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you think could happen with a Republican Congress now, and then a Democrat still leaning in a very Congress? Do you think that there's any hope that we'll see some work in that area?
I'm always hopeful and optimistic. I like to always believe for the best. Expect the worst and hope for the best kind of mentality. And so I do think there could be some movement on Safe Banking Plus. Right now, I mean, the people that are standing in the way are the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and then a few others, and those are the ones that we need
in the Senate, not in the Senate,
in the Senate, in the House. In the Senate, in the House. That's the easy one to pass. I'm not worried about it moving through the House. The Senate is where we have the blockade because it was all primed up for passage just in this last elections prior to this last election cycle, but yet Senator Cory Booker wanted to do his grandstand dying on the sword before these social equity bills will be passed prior to allowing for safe banking. And then Senator Chuck Schumer wants to make sure that his name is on the bill. And so there's the ego thing going on. And that's why he's like, oh, yeah, we're going to introduce this bill on 420. And you never heard anything and nothing's gone. And now the Democrats controlled all three branches of government and got nothing done for cannabis.
And by the way, I personally feel like some of the social equity programs that are failing, right, is because of the fact that people don't have access to banking services
100%
at market rates and SBA loans, right, Small Business Administration loans.
And I will say this to the social equity activists. One of their complaints about safe banking is that it doesn't mandate SBA loans.
It didn't.
It did not for minority businesses and other businesses, and they wanted that type of inclusionary language in there, and that is now included in Safe Banking Plus.
And it should be, I think.
But there's a lot of things that can be done outside of government to make the cannabis business much more effective. And I, for example, you can't just look at what the government's doing to say how we're gonna make this business a regular business as conducted by regular businessmen and businesswomen and entrepreneurs. I, for example, am working with a team now that we're trying to bring down what we've noticed. It's easy to notice that the insurance rates that he has to pay for his
you have your product liability insurance. You have your
but you want to So we call your cannabis stores. Okay, the stores that you have anyway
trip and fall liability insurance. All of those.
But it's at a higher rate than it should be.
Because we're cannabis.
And so my friends and I have tracked it down. That's the one thing I did on my own. And we found out that a lot of it has to do with London and the European markets in insurance. That all centers around London. So if you believe it or not,
historic and global, right? The Lloyd's of London is one of the most famous.
Anyway, we now have formed a company that's going to provide insurance for anybody at least 10% lower rate than they pay right now. And those type of reforms that can be done with private sector people like myself, but I'm just one of many people out there trying to do things and make a living doing the same thing now. But the point is that we can't just look at government, and especially just the federal government. We've got to look for trying to find ways to make the industry itself more efficient and take away government involvement in the business rather than add to it.
One of the biggest things that I've heard that kind of, got my goat, for lack of a better expression, right, was when the Jungle Boys were raided by California's, tax authorities.
They were not raided. That was not a raid.
What was a seizure?
That was not a raid.
It was a seizure.
Yes.
Yeah, mindfully. Okay, cool. So, in general, when that happened, and the response from CDTFA's spokesperson was, well, we're going to treat cannabis like any other business. But what had happened was during COVID, they were not able to take the cash payments that they're being made by the dispensary. So they never were able to actually make that payment. And then, of course, as time went by, whatever reason they didn't make it up at a later date or pay it, they never got to it or what have you, and they were making efforts. But the fact is cannabis is not like any other business. We pay as much excise tax as alcohol and tobacco and oil combined, right? When you look at it from that perspective, we don't have access to traditional banking without higher fees and higher interest rates and more layers of bureaucracy to get to. When we get private money, it's at a much higher interest rate, okay? The burn rate is gone in cannabis in California, right? It's all moved to New York. It's all moved to new markets where growth is, just sprouting. So here in California, it's about, surviving is thriving is a topic, we've been talking about
Take
lately.
your insurance rates. And that's because I know about that because I've been working on that now. But why has the insurance rates of the cannabis industry been higher than other industries?
Correct, right?
Well, because, again, Lloyd's of London and these other companies have refused to give reinsurance to any company provided insurance to their needs. So everybody else, if whatever insurance you're selling, you get a reinsurance package and you can charge less money because they've eliminated a lot of your risk. Well, if we got to there's all sorts of things like that stuck into the reality of doing business and in the cannabis industry, and we should take care of it. So
Yeah.
Hey, I want to hear what Dana has to say about the IRS and 280E. Have at, sir.
Well, actually, I believe that the IRS is theft. I mean, we're talking about theft. And anyway, you know that.
With 280E, though, does not allow a cannabis business right under, because of a Schedule 1 status, to claim any tax write-offs, right? So basically, if you're a retailer, and you are, right? I mean, is 280E...
Retail is the most expensive side of the supply chain when it comes to 280E because of what you are not allowed to write off as deductions. If you're a cultivator or a manufacturer, you can hide a lot of these costs into other companies, whether it be an advertising company, a packaging company, different types of things like that you still can get write-offs for. But when it comes to cannabis retail, you don't have very many options.
Cannabis shouldn't be taxed or controlled any more than wine. It should be wine. And I've been advocating that for a long time. I haven't gotten very far on it just yet, but I think that makes sense because people can understand it. And anytime you go beyond that, it's going to be to the detriment of the public.
Hey, so, this just popped in my head as a question. Dan, what might you say to some of the Republican Assembly and State Senate folks from like the Central Valley and some of our rural communities who have somewhat been in opposition to cannabis regulation, legalization, and access in their communities? Would you have a message for them? Because you are kind of like a clarion voice in the Republican, camp.
Well, first of all, you have to convince people that it's not cannabis. No longer is just getting high. I think we're going to find within a very short period of time, you're going to find that the medical uses of marijuana are outpacing the the fun type, recreational use of marijuana.
Well, I come from the Dennis Perone way of thinking in regards to this, and I believe that because cannabis gives you so many medical benefits just from consuming it, that most people are totally unaware of that is even happening within
The
their
holistic
body.
wellness effect.
That all use is medical use, regardless of whatever reason that you're consuming it for.
Right. I say holistic wellness is a dialogue that as an adult I should have the choice of making. And the endocannabinoid system or endocannabinoid, I don't know if I'm ever saying it right, but that it has the receptors for a reason, right?
100%. 100%. I mean, just by consuming cannabis, you naturally protect yourself from a head injury. Just because of that, because cannabis bonds to fat, your memory cells are all in the fat cells in your brain, and therefore by consuming cannabis, you basically get this little air cushion around your memory cells in your brain and actually protects you in the event of a head injury. Just for that alone.
I've actually heard that the federal government holds a patent for a skin patch, a hemp-derived skin patch for brain surgery.
I don't know about all that for a patch for brain surgery, but they do own some patents in regards to cannabis. Yes.
Right, that's crazy, right? And by the way, I mean that to me is, what cannabis has never been treated like. So for the business side of it, Dan, and I get it, right? But when we talk about the fear of incarceration and we talk about fear of asset forfeiture when it wasn't legal, when they didn't have structured regulations, I think that it's
You mean
huge.
prior to Rohrabacher-Farr?
Yeah, prior to Rohrabacher-Farr, for real. Amen. And that's the truth. We used to worry about people leaving, right, losing their freedoms, being torn from their families. Actually, Corvain, I had him on stage. He was granted not a pardon, but what was it?
He was granted clemency.
Clemency, thank you. Right. So I mean, he was granted clemency from a life sentence. From a life sentence for selling cannabis. And I asked him what he taught his daughter how to drive a car after receiving clemency, and that was a big deal. But there's still time for us to get in. All right, so gentlemen, this has been a great conversation. I want to say thank you to you both once again. But before we close the night, I always ask guests on this show, in the spirit of fairness and common ground, is there anything I didn't ask you about or we didn't plan to cover that you would like to close out on tonight? The soapbox is yours. Jason, we'll start with you. Any ideas, thoughts, imperatives, any upcoming news, anything you'd like to talk about?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of things always going on, but I just encourage people to always think with your own mind. Always consume the best cannabis that you possibly can, because I only smoke the best weed in the world. And make sure you subscribe to High at 9 News on YouTube or Rumble, whatever your preference is. highat9news.com. Yes, and sign up for our weekly newsletter, and we're gonna keep bringing you the heat. If you guys have stories and stuff that you'd like to see us cover, you can email us at tips@highat9news.com, or you can go to our website and submit a tip. And we encourage as much community participation on the site and on the social media feeds as possible. So appreciate all your support, and we'll be doing that every day, every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific and high noon on the East Coast, because it is America's #1 daily cannabis news show.
I mean it too. I'm hoping over maybe next week or next couple
we'll
of weeks, I'll come on and I'll find.
Yeah.
I'll grab a story.
Most definitely. And just so you know, just so everyone understands this, is we don't cover stories older than 72 hours old from the moment they're released to the time that they're aired on the network. Our only exception is for doctors and lawyers if there's a certain medical information that needs to be shared or legal information that needs to be shared. But other than that, you have 72 hours from whenever you come on to find your story from within.
Boom.
Yes.
All right. And so, Congressman Rohrabacher, if I may say it one more time tonight, would you share some thoughts with us before we close out?
Well, I could
I thought we were getting him to sing a song.
play my song if you want.
Would you?
Okay.
Now, Jason, will you hold the mic for him so that he can get his guitar? And
Oh man, that's awesome.
I'll hold my
Yeah, smoke it.
That's right.
get the microphone over there so that we can pick up on it. All right.
I am not a entertainer. I'm a congressman. Or was a I'm not even a
But
congressman.
now that you're retired, try some new things, sir. Try some new things.
Okay, I wrote this song a long time ago when I was well-asked guy. This is my libertarian song. Can you hear that? I don't own nobody. Nobody should own me. I'm just an individual man. I just want to be free. I will make my money. If you make yours, that's fine. I won't take none of yours. So get your grubby hands off mine. Oh, you can't legislate my morals or anything I do. I can have some pot. I'll have my girl because I'm not kissing you. That's it.
That was fun. And so everybody, from my perspective, what I'd like to share is next month is April. It's a beautiful month. We have the 420 celebration of all things cannabis coming up. Here at Cannabis Capitol, we have a lot of good events that are outside of our studios that are going to be happening. Now, next week, we are a media partner for Network, which is a cannabis trade show for only professionals, right? It's going to be held for 2 days in Los Angeles. It's going to bring together cultivators and product manufacturers and distributors with licensed dispensaries and retailers and deliveries. This is going to be a really big thing. So if you go on our website or you go to networkshow.co, I believe, you can go on and find out how to register if you are a licensed cannabis professional and you want to attend and be part of that show. We also have an event coming up on the 15th in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area, getting out into our desert community, Desert Haze. You can find information about that on our website, RSVP to attend. And we're going to be filming a live episode of Are You Smarter Than a Bud Tender? But we're taking it on the road. And then on April 20th in the great city of Phoenix, we will be at the Hotel Clarendon hosting the first Cannabis Capitol Cup for cultivators in the state of Arizona. So if you want to take a little bit of a drive, you can come do that. And those are some big things. And, I just want to say personally to Jason tonight, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
We have been talking about collaborating on things for a while. So you're going to see me on High at 9. And I'm going to hold him to that. Amen.
I'm going to come back and come visit you from time to time and bring you guys some trending stories on what's happening. And we're going to talk some smack and see what people are thinking about. And
that's great. I want to get you back here again. Yeah. Absolutely. But I want to say from the bottom of my heart, Congressman, such a pleasure to have you here. You can tell I'm a fanboy. It's a fanboy moment for me, but with real legitimate, clear reasons why I'm praising you that way, right? I do know that you worked hard and passed the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. I do know that veterans have greater access to medicinal cannabis as an option against opioids, which are killing their livers and, bringing depression and suicide in ungodly ways. I do know that those are things you accomplished in cannabis. I also know that you fought for the American way of life for 30 years. And the fact that you had to be part of Congress for 30 years, we should all say a great, thank you to you and enjoy your retirement, sir. Thank you for being here tonight. And on that note, I want to thank Brian and John and the Cannabis Capitol crew for everything they do to put these shows on tonight. Next month, we will be back with another episode. But until then, stay focused, stay high, stay happy.
Don't fall for jokes tomorrow.
And stay free.
Free.
Free.